Good morning. Welcome. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Given that this went up last night, I'm really excited by the folks that have decided to join us this morning. Thank you so much for sharing your morning with us. Welcome to Boards and Change, How Governance Helps and Hinders the Change We Seek to Make. I would like to first allow our panelists to introduce themselves. Then I'll share some quick opening remarks, and then we're going to get to some questions and hopefully to a Q&A by the end. This session is meant to end at 12:15 Eastern time. We might go a few minutes longer, but I know we all want to get to the ley lines at 12:30 Eastern, so we will be done in plenty of time for that. All right, our esteemed panelists. I'm just going to call you by first name and then just let us know your name, your preferred pronouns, and your position. Michelle, why don't we start with you?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Really excited to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. My pronouns are she, her, hers. My name is Michelle Branch, and I'm a trustee with the Oregon Shakespeare Festival.
Great. I'm just seeing that Lillian has Lillian, I'm going to send you a different link. Or maybe Big or Natalie, can you send Lillian the link for panelists? I think that she only has the link for the whole group. Great, Michelle. Moving on then to Teresa.
Hi, I'm Teresa Eyring, Executive Director of TCG, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Great. Moving to Nataki.
Hi, I'm Nataki Garrett. I'm the Artistic Director of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. My pronouns are she, hers.
Great. Dominique.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dominique Moriso, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a playwright.
Great. And Jacob.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jacob Padron, he, him, his. I'm the Artistic Director of Longworth Theater in New Haven, Connecticut, and the founder and Artistic Director of the Soul Project based in New York City.
Great. Oh, fantastic. And Lil, you're currently in as me. Hang on, let me change your name to your own name. And Lil, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, hi. Yes, I'm Lillian Brown. I use she, her pronouns. I'm in Chicago, and I am a freelance director.
Fantastic, fantastic. All right, so, and my name is Lisa Portes. I head the MFA directing program at the theater school at DePaul University, and I'm on the TCG board along with Nataki, and I'm a director. And I just want to start by saying, some of you may have seen the piece on medium.com yesterday, in which one of our students at the theater school at DePaul University, TJ Harris, details an incident of having been profiled in our building by a DePaul University public safety officer. And the HR department, having closed the case open by TJ and our dean, claiming that no profiling had happened. I am angry and ashamed that this harm happened in our home and that I didn't know about it. And I'm pulling together the tenured faculty, because tenured faculty have some kind of positional power and job security, to seek accountability from the university. But the point here is white supremacist systems are embedded within the institutions in which we work. And BIPOC theater makers end up in the kind of untenable position of being complicit, either wittingly or unwittingly, and at the same time victimized by those systems. This session is about dismantling those systems at the board level. So I have an exercise that I do with my graduate directors. It's called Helps or Hinders. You identify the dramatic quest of the protagonist, and then you go through each of the other characters, determine whether they help, hinder, mostly hinder, or both help and hinder the protagonist in their quest. And then you lay out the ways in which they do so. So Hamlet seeks to avenge his father's death. Claudius generally hinders, though he helps a little bit by hiring a couple of dumbasses and freaking out at the play. And Horatio helps in every way he can, actually. Everyone else is along a spectrum from helps to hinders. So let's imagine that the protagonist of our play right now, we'll call them Nova, seeks to knock down systems of oppression and exclusion within their theater to create a theater that is responsive to the entire community of which it is a part. How might the character, board of directors or trustees, help or hinder that quest? My first question is going to go out to the artist, because I think, without artists, there's no theater, right? Artists are the center of the theatrical event. It's their storytelling for and with the community that is a reason we have theaters, yet often artists find themselves disconnected from the people that govern the theater. So this is to Liliane and to Dominique. If you could speak to a board or board member of a theater that you call home or care deeply about, you don't have to name the theater, you can if you want, but you don't have to, about a change you'd like to see, what would you say?
Sorry, Leanne, we were like, you, me. So I am on the board of a couple of theaters, and I do talk to different board members, and I talk to people who are starting theaters or who are, I also talk to boards of institutions that aren't necessarily theaters, but they're theater spaces, or they host theater artists. For one, I think that there's a limit to where boards are getting where theaters are finding their board members. And so I want to see that broaden. I want to see them broaden their economic base, because that who goes out and gets the money for your theater is who has the power in your theater, right? That's who we all feel at the end of the day responsible to a lot of times, because we feel like without their support, then we won't keep our theater going. And if that power looks like only one thing, it's like any other kind of power structure in this country. It's imbalanced, and so their ideologies may be also imbalanced, and the things that they press you to or don't support as a board might also be imbalanced. So if I could talk to board members, well, really, I talk to theaters about searching for board members that have a range of not just in a range in their cultural background and their ethnicity, but also a range in where they go and find their monies and which communities that they have financial bases in, because that needs to broaden, I think. And then I have also wanted to say to theaters again, in terms of choosing boards, because a lot of times, because they're beholden to their boards so much, I also want to say, when you bring in a board, they need to know not just this like generalized mission of the theater, but if things like saying dismantle white supremacy scares your board, then they shouldn't be on your board. If that's your theater's mission, or if it truly is your theater's mission. So if that's a covert mission, then you should still have a board that understands and knows how you're going to support your artists and how you're going to stand up, and that can get behind that. It's how do you orientate your board to understanding the philosophy of what they are buying into. And that to me is important. If I could talk to board members directly, I would say that this has to be, not only is it democracy amongst, the board itself, it needs to be democratized around theater community, and you have to be able to be willing to listen to what the theater community wants, and also branch out who that theater community is and what they look like. So those are things that I recently had a conversation with some board members, in conversation with a group of people who are also board members. And words like white supremacy were, not words that they wanted to, that they could get behind, really. Now, white privilege, maybe, white supremacy, not so much. And I thought, well, what's the core white privilege? So it's also about like understanding the relationship between those things, not being afraid of words that hold us accountable for things we don't like. Things that really feel uncomfortable and dirty. I think that we have to be able to train our board members from various backgrounds about the most progressive values of our society that theater is trying to reflect. That's what I'll say.
Naps, thank you so much. And you are at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. your time. I just got to say, Dominique, like, I wish I was as well spoken at 8 a.m. Lillian.
Yeah, it's funny, Dominique, because you're on boards. I used to have a board. I used to be the artistic director of a storefront theater here in Chicago. And so all of my consternation about boards comes from my own experience with my own board that essentially imploded a theater that was actually doing extremely well at the time. And we just weren't allowed to go forward. And it was a huge lesson for me about the board's importance and how they can help or hinder a theater. And so I've talked to so many other people and said, what's your experience with your board? And one of the things that I found is, my question to the board would be, why are you here? That is my biggest question. Why are you here? Because I found that there's quite a spectrum of reasons, and they don't all necessarily have to do with the mission of the theater. And if someone is not there for the mission of the theater, we gotta get them out. Like, they cannot be there. And that can be quite tricky and sticky because the boards are in many ways held above even the highest administrators of a theater, right? The boards have hire and fire power over artistic directors, executive directors, whether or not the artistic director or executive director is even part of the board is variable. So sometimes they're kept out of the room. I was often kept out of the room, not allowed to attend board meetings. I'm not the only person this can have happened to. So it's not just there has to be some system of checks and balances when we have like an omnipotent, all-powerful board, and they're there for their own random agenda. Ours happened to be that they really liked performing in a non-professional benefit show because they had mostly come from a theater where, Victory Gardens, where this had been the fundraiser, and that theater stopped having the fundraiser, and we started having that fundraiser, so they decided to come over to us. And to have a bunch of people actually be there all for one reason, this thing that was done for 1 week a year, and to not care about really anything else that happened the rest of the year, not only was that spirit breaking, but it served as an example for, I think, a thing that's happening in a different form all over the country. We don't know why some of these people are there. Some people are there to have a philanthropic thing on their CV. Sometimes people came there from an old artistic director, and we're now seeing unprecedented turnover in the country as sort of the founding fathers are all retiring, right? These people that founded theaters 30 years ago and are now retiring, and now we're seeing this turnover, and the same pipeline is not there. I've had an ED sit down and tell me, I came up from the box office, and he's really proud of that, and that's a really cool thing. But I was like, great, and now does someone from the box office have the same pipeline that you do? Because you're gonna be retiring soon. Is your board, they're here because you started this thing, or you've been here forever, and they're here behind you, not behind the mission necessarily. So the why are you here can't be a person, and it can't be an agenda. It has to be the mission only, or we're really losing out.
Great. Thank you so much, Lillian. Thank you so much. I'm going to move to we have two leaders here, new artistic leaders of Legacy White Theaters, Nataki Garrett and Jacob Padron. As the Novas of our play, Can you talk a little bit both about a moment of great light or opportunity with your board, and then about perhaps the biggest challenge you've encountered with your board thus far?
I'll speak to that a little bit. So we've actually gone through a lot of, we've had quite a few really great heights with this board. I officially started the job last October. We were able to finalize a budget after a lot of back and forth. Here's the thing is I inherited my board, and if you think about my predecessor and how long he was here and the work he did to cultivate this group of people, and in a lot of ways, the board still reflects the values that he recruited them through and for. And not to say that there's not alignment there, but I find that often, especially now, what I'm facing is having to remind the board that I'm not my predecessor, that I am actually, I am this leader, the one that you hired. So I feel like in some ways I inherit a board, and the board has to inherit with hiring me my experiences, my lived experience, and something very new in the board world, which is they have a Black woman at the helm. And that's different than what they've experienced. I'm not a Black man. I'm not a man of color. I'm not a man at all. I'm a woman, and I'm a Black woman, and there are specific things that come with having to support a woman who lives in this body. And a lot of what I feel like I'm doing with my board lately is really trying to train them towards what that really means, the implications of that. I think recently, I can say that the thing that's the hardest right now is if this disease does not do anything else, it is a great clarifier. It is turning on the lights all over the building and shining into the corners of our edifices and clarifying who we are as an organization and sweeping out from under the rug some of those parts that we wanted to hide about who we are, and bringing to light our strengths. And all of those things are, as they're coming to light, are difficult to manage and stomach, especially if you're not paying attention to what's really happening. And I think the hardest thing that'll happen as we move through this crisis into what is going to be something that is, I won't use normal because that word connotes something moving back. It's going to be completely different from where we were before, a paradigm shift. As we move in that direction, I have to be conscious as I'm helping my board pivot towards what this theater is going to be in the new paradigm. And that's, I think, really hard if people are held to their desires for the theater to be what it was and to still have the impact that it did in the same way to the same group of people. So I'd say the hardest thing right now is the coronavirus and its clarifying nature, and the fact that we are about to take a very, very hard pivot into a direction that I could see coming. I came here for that pivot. It's just happening a lot faster than we had intended.
Great, thank you. Jacob?
Oh, Nataki, thank you for that. It really, really resonates. And Lisa, thank you for organizing us. You know, I think I too inherited my board, but I inherited a board who was really actually hungry to do the work. They were hungry to change. They were hungry to listen. They were hungry to create the conditions, I think, for me to be successful. So I have actually had a really fantastic experience with my board. It's not to say that there aren't challenges, but the way in which they have allowed me to really come to the organization in my full humanity, with my vision, with my passion, and to support that has been really moving. And a particular, just to answer the two questions, Lisa, a light moment and a challenge. I actually have two specific examples that I want to share. A moment of light with my board was a board member actually took it upon himself to read the book White Fragility, and then bought the book for every single board member, and then hosted a book club for them to actually talk about how are they real allies in this work, which I thought was such a moving experience. Another example was my board chair, Laura Popano. She hosted a dinner. She said, why don't we just have an emergent conversation? You come and we'll be the agenda, very Adrienne Maree Brown, which is, we're gonna talk and we're gonna actually see where we're at in this work because everyone's at different places. But how can we come together in community? How can we have this conversation? And how can we support Jacob? And how can we support the pivot that Longworth is trying to make? And then the challenge, Nataki, just what you said about what it was versus where we're going. And I think that continues to be a tension because what I've said to the board, and I think they really hear me, is you have to give me a runway. You have to give me a runway to evolve this company. I can't do it overnight. And it's not going to happen over 1 season, 2 seasons, maybe even 3 seasons. My runway has to be expansive. And my hope is that you will be patient with me. You will be a thought partner with me. And you will hold me accountable, but I'm going to hold you accountable too because of who I am and the vision that I put forward when I was a candidate for the job. That's the thing that I just continue to be really grateful for, that they've never asked me to change the vision that I put forward. I was very clear when I went through the search process, this is what I care about. I care about social justice. I care about art and activism living side by side. I care about us being an anti-racist institution, and use that language in the interview process. So that's where I'm at.
Fantastic, fantastic. God, we are so lucky to have everybody on this panel here. Really, what a morning. I'm going to pivot over to Teresa Eyring, who is the Executive Director of TCG, because TCG really has a unique board structure. It's something that actually, when Lillian brought up boards in the individual artist session on, I think it was Wednesday, Larissa Fastor said TCG's got a really interesting structure. So Teresa, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the board structure of TCG, how it came to be, and pros and cons that you see in the current structure.
Sure. I wanted to talk a minute about just a couple questions that came up in the chat. Well, one in particular that has to do with, somebody mentioned the white supremacy that's built into the very structure of nonprofit laws and requirements, and the requirement for having a board. Actually, the 501c3 nonprofit requirement is that you have at least 3 board members. And many of our theaters have, and TCG has 35 board members, but many of our theaters have 40, 50, 60 board members. And that's not necessary. I know one organization, not a theater, but an association, that recently did a strategic plan, and they realized that their board was not, they wanted to build a more diverse, anti-racist board, and they ended up, a number of their board members resigned so that they could resigned willingly, stepped aside so that they could change the makeup of the board and who was at the table. So that's something that's totally doable. I just want to talk also about, before I get to the TCG piece, there are 3, if you look on nonprofit, National Council of Nonprofits, or on Board Source, they will enumerate the 3 legal duties of board members. The duty of care, which is taking care of prudent use of all assets, facilities, people, money. Duty of loyalty, which is ensuring that the nonprofit's activities are advancing its mission, that its finances and all of its transactions are advancing its mission. Dealing with conflicts of interest, also making sure that all decisions are in the best interest of the organization, not in the best interest of the individual board member. And then the duty of obedience, which is making sure the nonprofit is obeying the law, basically, and following its own bylaws. And one of the things that I've noticed in a lot of theater boards is that the discussions around the finances and the assets and the laws and tend to be the primary focus, the money. You know, what do people talk about? They talk about the money. They talk about the art as well, but the real focus, the real concentration in a board meeting or, you know, on various calls that take place throughout the year is about the money. How are we doing financially? How can we raise more money? What are we going to do? We have a deficit. You know, that's the concentration on the mission, which is, you know, in some cases, we have so many theaters that have mission statements, predominantly white companies that have mission statements that say that they are focused on, you know, one of the aspects of their mission is to have a diverse audience or to serve their diverse community, where they're not. And I don't think those boards are necessarily spending, you know, as much time as possible really examining the mission and really making sure, holding themselves accountable to what they're saying they're there for. And I think that's a really crucial step that needs to be taken. But back to TCG. TCG was founded in 1961. We didn't incorporate until 1964. And it's always been a board that is made up primarily of theater practitioners, artistic directors, managing directors, individual artists, theater educators. We also have space on the board for people who come from other industries, and those are the people we usually rely on more in order to help us raise money and make connections in communities that we wouldn't ordinarily be able to make on our own. And what makes this board unique, I mean, some of the leaders we've had over the years, it's unbelievable. You know, Nina Vance from the Alley, Zelda Fitchandler from Arena, Lloyd Richards from Yale, Ricardo Kahn from Crossroads, Diane Rodriguez, our current, you know, mostly artistic directors, but our current board chair is Kate LaPuma, who's a really extraordinary managing leader. What I think is so interesting about our board is that what we talk about, first of all, our board is very, understands its fiduciary responsibility. So even though it's not a big fundraising board, the board understands the importance of paying attention to where TCG's resources are going and whether or not we're in a fiscally stable place so that we can continue our work for years to come. So very attentive to how we're allocating resources, very attentive to fiscal health. And I appreciate that so much. But we also spend quite a bit of time in our conversation talking about our mission, which is to strengthen, currently is to strengthen, nurture, and promote the theater field. That mission is under examination and is evolving. But I think what's great is that we spend a lot of our time really talking about what's happening in the theater field, what are the needs of theaters, what are the needs of artists, and also recognizing, especially over the last 10 years or so, how deep the racial injustice, the structural racism is in our theater field, and really working to try to dismantle that, to become an anti-racist organization, more so than we were. So that is a big part of our discussion, you know, in every meeting, every single meeting. And we have an EDI, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, currently co-chaired by Nataki, or I'm sorry, not Nataki's on it, I think, but by Nicole Salter and Harold Stewart. So it's unique in that we're more about ideas and about mission and less a money board. And I think both cultures can be really difficult to change. Our board wouldn't easily morph into a board that's more about fundraising and talking about the money, and boards that are more focused on the money and the assets and the fundraising and how much a show is going to make. It's more difficult to morph that kind of a board into a board that's more focused on the mission and the ideas and the need for equity and dismantling white supremacy in our theater system.
Great. Thank you so much. And I would say also as a board member, and Nataki's also a board member, that I think because there's not a give and get, you know, you have a lot more fleetness in terms of who can be on the board, who has access, you know what I mean, to a position at the table. And I think that's where the kind of the kind of wide imagination of the board sits, is the kind of wide group of people that's sitting currently at the table. I mean, when I look around our board right now, I'm really excited, actually. It's not like any room I'm in. It's not like any other room that has any kind of power that I'm ever in. Okay, I'm gonna move over to Michelle Branch, our trustee from Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Michelle, I know that you've served on the board of Berkeley Rep and on their governance committee, I believe, and now that you're on the board of Oregon Shakespeare Festival. You know, I found that board members trustees truly think of themselves as stewards of their communities. Nataki describes you as a change-making board member. Where have you felt you've been able to make change, and where have you felt yourself hindered, and why?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to kind of move back and start a little bit from the beginning and just say that I think that this is a conversation about power and power structures and where the power lies on boards and within arts organizations. So with me, I almost always join the governance committee when I start with an organization. Now that's because I'm a lawyer, but I start with governance, and then I typically will become an officer, and then I will join the executive committee. And that's because when I join the board, I'm there to commit and I'm there to step up. I'm there for the mission of the organization. The governance committees and the executive committees are your most powerful committees. It's where board members are nominated. It's where policies are reviewed and adopted. It's where strategic plan initiatives arise. It's the source of change in many ways, unless change is coming from outside the organization where there's protest and there are requests from outside. Typically, any change is going to be coming from within the executive committees and the governance committees. So I've been able to make changes by just simply joining boards and sitting on those committees. And, you know, those committees tend to be populated by the most senior and most powerful board members. So people who've been on the boards for the longest, oftentimes who have the most money, you know, they will have the most powerful voice. I'm able to join because, as I mentioned, I'm a lawyer with quite a bit of experience in corporate governance, and I also have access to resources, but it's various kinds of resources. So foundation resources, friends who also have resources, friends who work in law firms, my own legal expertise, and I've been able to join those committees and then bring resources to bear. One of the suggestions that I would make is, you know, if you're looking for disruption, try to disrupt those committees in some ways. So think about who else you can bring to the governance committee and the executive committee. Get people to step up, get people to be officers. Secretary is a good way to join the executive committee because a secretary is an officer. That's the person who takes the minutes and the notes. That's the record of what's happening within the organization. And as you can imagine, depending on who's taking those notes, the view of what's happening in the organization will be represented quite differently. But I would suggest, you know, think about bringing younger people, people of color, LGBTQ people, bring non-lawyers, bring other perspectives into those governance and executive committees and into those officer roles. You know, my own strength has been in asking questions and in getting people to explain how things work and why they work and why they're that way, which is interesting because when you ask people to explain, oftentimes, you know, sometimes people get into justifying, but they also might really, you know, people of goodwill will try to think about, you know, why is it that it's this way and why hasn't it changed? And oh yeah, maybe this is something that should be revisited. So by asking questions, you can get other people in the room to really step up. I mean, I think one of the issues with boards has to do with everybody, you know, wanting to be friendly with each other. Oftentimes people are, you know, friends with the chair of the board, an executive director who knows they've been on the board for a very long period of time. And there are established relationships. You know, we're talking about how to make change, right? So sometimes, you know, change might have to come from the outside because a board tends to become like a family over time. And sometimes families can be dysfunctional. I mean, sometimes they can be really functional, but you know, we're in the theater and we know about drama and stories. And so oftentimes families can be dysfunctional. So I think it's really important to start to ask questions, to provide some analysis, and to really speak up and get other people to do the same. But it really can just start with one person asking a question. I mean, I don't want to be Pollyannish or naive, but I do think one person asking a question can really provoke a call and a response. So that's what I would say. Also, I think it's important to be able to disagree, you know, respectfully, of course, but one needs to have her own opinion and to be able to disagree. So, you know, generically, you know, speaking, other places where I can and have made change, you know, when I'm able to bring new voices to the table, expert resources, frankly, money. You know, I have a different network that's often untapped. You know, like I said, when I join a board, I'm not typically part of the existing family, but I do have friends who have resources to bring to bear. It's very important, I think, to bring new blood into organizations when you're looking for change. But, you know, in terms of money,
Oh no. She froze. Michelle.
ability and willingness to support those and to bring new people to the table for those. To answer your question about, you know, where it is that I feel like I've been hindered, you know, it's often in the same places, and, you know, kind of, and also where I've been helpful is in changing the status quo. It's often in trying to speak up for, or not trying to, but actually speaking up for voices with less power. So that can be women, it can be people of color, it can be people who are of different gender backgrounds. It could also, or gendered representations, it can also be the homeless or the undocumented, depending upon which board I'm on, because typically the board is going to represent the status quo in some way. So it's really important to be able to bring these new voices to the table. And it's important for us to really challenge and show that we have the time, talent, and treasure. I mean, that's the, you know, you always hear those words about time, talent, and treasure, but to show that we can fully participate and make decisions on the board. How many times have you sat on a board and someone said, oh, we can't get those kinds of people, you know, they're too busy, they don't have any money, they don't have the background, they don't have the resources. And I have to say, well, that's actually not true. You know, I mean, how many people are we really looking for? You know, if it's, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 people, you mean you can't tell me that you can't find, you know, 5 people in your network who can bring the vision that you're interested in. And so I really would challenge people to map their networks. Oftentimes I found that people kind of just look to see, well, you know, who are the immediate people I know, without challenging themselves to go deeper and to reach out and to really ask. It doesn't need to be part of your friend network. You know, we're really here for the mission of the organization. The other challenge I would say that I have is sometimes once I show up on the board, people feel like they've done the work, so to speak, because I'm a woman, I'm a person of color, and I'm there. And then they expect, you know, it's going to be handed over to me and I'm going to take care of everything. And it doesn't work like that. As we all know, we all need to work and pull together. So, you know, one of the things I've been saying lately is I'm going to join a new board. You know, I would really like to make sure that I'm joining with people of like-minded interests, so I'm not having to do that alone. So that's another thing that you can do, you know, with board members, is bring on a cohort, which is one of the things that we've done at OSF, is bring on a cohort of new board members together so people can really be working in concert together, rather than just kind of one person coming in and having a new voice. Bring a group of people in who can, you know, really work together and form and kind of form a team in a way, you know, with the board. So, you know, working as a group. The other thing I would say is, you know, just in terms of success, I'm the chair of an arts organization in San Francisco. And recently, around the protests relating to the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, we had a young African-American woman artist challenge us in our organization to say, you know, we don't have enough representation of Black people. Specifically, and she's challenging lots of organizations, but we don't have enough representation. And, you know, SF Camera Work, that's the organization I'm the chair of the board of, you know, what are you going to do about that? And so it was really interesting opportunity to take up that challenge and say, yeah, actually, I agree with you. Actually, we do have representation, but actually I agree with you, and we need to do one better. So we need to be looking at our governance structures, you know, how we're making our programming choices, our funding choices, you know, who's sitting on our board. Let's think about that. And so I wrote a letter to our entire community saying, I hear you and I agree with you, and I want to invite you in, and I want to invite you to step up. I want people to nominate people of color. I want people to nominate specifically Black people in this moment to sit in our committees, to sit in our bodies, to make decisions with us. And so far it's gotten a very good response. I understand that letter is being circulated through, you know, SF MoMA, DeYoung Museum. I mean, I'm the chair of a very small, you know, arts organization, but it's sounding like, you know, some of these issues are really resonating, and the letter is being circulated and people are really wanting to step up. So already I've gotten, you know, recommendations for 5 Black men who could be interested in joining our board. That hadn't happened before. And so that's just with listening to someone from, who respects us and knows us, who wanted a response and saying, yeah, I agree. I want to invite you in. What can we do? And let's do it. Let's make some changes today. Which these are, of course, things we are working on and, have moving forward on. But let's make some more changes in this moment. And now let's take advantage of the opportunity that we're given at this moment.
That's fantastic. And it goes back to something that I believe Dominique raised, which is the board's responsibility to listen to its community, to listen to its full community, not just kind of who's at the table. Something that you brought up, Michelle, is the idea of, being the, once I'm there, oh no, Jacob. Moving and shaking. But that, that often people go like, oh, phew, I'm done because I have a woman and a person of color on my, I hit both boxes with one person. Two boxes in one. Nataki and I were talking yesterday and recalling an experience in which a board member whose needs have been traditionally centered found his opinion, and it's his, which would have been previously very likely taken up with many like, here's, kind of fall flat. What happens, so it's interesting, what happens when the board is not part of the same club? What are the opportunities and the pitfalls when you disrupt the club and the assumptions that go with the club? What happens when you disrupt that security?
Is that a question back to me?
Michelle and Teresa, and anybody else, actually. We got a lot of folks here.
I actually think it's great because I think that new alliances and new relationships can be formed, and people shouldn't assume that just because they speak an idea and because of their subject position that it will be accepted. It should be, a good idea that people have really, kind of thought deeply about, is well vetted, supported by research, evidence, that kind of thing. But I think it's important also for people to have to reach out and make kind of new alliances and friendships and connections and partnerships on the board. I think that's really critical. I mean, the one thing I'll say recently I have learned is I have seen boards really try to get everybody unified together. I'm not sure that that's the right way to go necessarily. When making change, you will need someone or a few people who really are kind of the spear tip, who want to make some change. And I think a lot of time is spent, trying to get everybody to agree. When in reality, what should happen is let's understand how people really feel, what they're really thinking, what these positions are, then who's going to actually stand up and support that. And so I don't know that, I don't think it's a bad thing for, someone's idea to fall flat, because that's how it's actually being perceived. They need to see that.
Great. Anybody else want
to? Yeah, I agree with you, Michelle, that I think that we actually rely on consensus in a way where we actually tend to neutralize whatever it is that you're working towards. And one of the things that I really appreciated about that moment, I was in that same meeting that Lisa's talking about. One of the things I appreciated about that moment is that we had a real robust, real deep conversation about something that was really important to the industry. And it was really necessary to be engaged from your point of view, so that we could come to not agreement about how we were going to move forward. What we could agree on is that we had a course of action to move forward, taking in all of the complexities of everybody's point of view as we moved into that space. I think that what we think consensus building is making everybody agree. And what consensus building is collecting and gathering around a myriad of ideas so that you can move forward with those ideas, understanding that some of this is disagreement, some of this is alignment, all of it is trying to move something forward. And I also find that what happens when you're just consensus building all the time is that you tend to move towards that one point of view that is the most negative, because sometimes the most negative point of view feels like it's the most right. It's the most, but it's not necessarily. It's just a negative point of view.
That's great. I'm going to pivot back to Dominique and to Lillian. We've started in this moment, and it is really a devastating, painful, but also crucial and galvanizing moment. We're starting to really see artists speak up. The Playwrights Ensemble recently left Victory Gardens Theater, and director Monty Cole just pulled his show from their Ignition Festival. Given this moment of transition and the opportunities afforded the field to make significant systemic change, what is the artistic response if governance doesn't shift to reflect the values embedded in the work on stage?
Well, I think that, first of all, I think that artists have a lot of power, and oftentimes we are sort of squashed from using that power out of the threat of our work ever being produced again, you know? And I think that we're in a new moment because we're in a pandemic and none of us knows when the hell our art is gonna go out there again anyway. Right. And so I think you're going to see a lot more bravery and courage from artists, because this moment is asking us to kind of get back to the essence of who we are and what our work is about, and not so much the commerce of it or the putting it, the practice of getting the work out into the world is very different right now. We actually have a lot more agency over our work in that way. I think that it's sort of like the music industry, which my husband is a part of the music industry for a very long time. And he's always looked at models of power, you know, because I'm always questioning the power dynamics of theater. And he always tells me theater's a dinosaur compared to all these other industries in terms of the imbalance of power, because music artists have long ago gone independent and have not needed big record labels in order to get access to audiences and to get their music heard, right? And theater artists have not figured that out. But we are in a moment where theater is, because music is digital, you know, music has access to, you know, what we're doing right now. Music's been doing this a long time ago. And so I think that we're in a moment right now where now theater has to figure out its digital, you know, space. It has to figure out like what it is in a digital form until we can get back into real actual houses. So I think we're about to not be dinosaurs, and that move is going to be led by the artists. And I think artists are going to be able to find themselves being a lot more independent of theaters. And I think there's sometimes we get into this relationship with theaters, institutions in general, where we have to be in positions of gratitude, where we don't have any agency or say over our work, where we are always negotiating ourselves, our relationships, our experiences, the communities we write about and for, with people who may or may not be from those communities, but being able to be the experts on our experience, because they get the authority, their authority in the press, their authority in the dramaturgy process, their authority in the producing process. And I think we're upon a moment where we're going to take back that authority, because there's no reason not to. We have the ability to have following that is independent of being, you know, sort of committed or being sort of at the will of the theater subscriber base. What subscriber base? We're talking to like the world right now. You know what I mean? Like we have access to the world. It's going to create, I think, a very seismic shift in our industry about how artists are negotiating their art, and the feeling of powerlessness that I think artists has is going to change. You know, so I don't know. None of us knows exactly how it's going to take shape, but I do think that we are in a moment of not being able to. We can take our voices, the voices of the communities. We're all feeling, I think, this moment of civic unrest in our nation on the ground is not going to just be on the ground. You know, it's in everybody's field, because it's everybody's industry. Because people are having a lot of time to think right now. They're having a lot of time to reflect on what makes them disgruntled and lack of being complacent in where they are in their industry. And so I would say, I feel really charged right now that artists can take the power back over their art. I would encourage artists to remember why they do their art and who they're doing their art for, what they definitely want to speak to, because a lot of times that has not been happening in the theater spaces. We're not always able to speak to who our work is about. I had lots of conversations with playwrights who are feeling like my work doesn't even get in front of half the kind of people that's on that stage. You know, the people on the stage and the people in the audience rarely match or even halfway match. And I think it's not about, I want to be clear, it's not about uninviting people to the party. It's about where the people who have not been invited to the party, why haven't they been invited to the party? And I think we're going to have to re-centralize the audiences who our work reflects. And that's a big deal for me. It's actually it's a non-starter for me at this point. You know, I can't come back to theater without, you cannot have me on your stage and not have me in your house. That is what I call, and I've said this phrase before, but that's Jim Crow theater. You know, that looks like something from another era, you know, and we can't come out of another civil rights movement back to Jim Crow behavior. So I'm not okay with it. And I don't think a lot of artists are going to be okay with it. And I think that that's going to mean that theaters are going to have to engage artists in the whole pedagogy of the theater and not just engage us on, you know, our plays. You know, they're going to have to engage us on their pedagogy. And I'm looking forward to seeing how we're going to create policy with theaters, how we're going to be able to be a part of the think tank and not just be paraded out as artists on the front, you know, be on the front lines and not be a part of the mind behind the scene.
Oh my Lord. Somebody write that down and publish it. Lillian, do you want to speak?
Yeah, amen, Dominique. I want to speak to the institutional problem. Dominique just spoke so eloquently about what individual artists can do. And as someone that dwelled in a more institutional area, even though it was independent, because that's what I was always told, right? I was always like, this is a problem. This is a problem. These institutions have a problem. And people were like, okay, loudmouth, well, start your own thing, do your own thing. So I did, and found myself facing some of the exact same problems because systemic racism is systemic. So if people of color break away and start their own organizations, we face some of the same issues: how to find funding, how to reach our audiences, et cetera, et cetera. Like, it's, we face the same difficulties we face in every other sector. And we know that institutions are slow boats to turn. And so the solution of like, we'll jump off the boat and swim, yeah, we can do it. And we will do it. And we'll swim excellently. And we'll build our own boats. And all of that is very possible. But do we also like abandon these ships to like drift and rust? And I don't, my gut says no. How do we fight on both fronts? How do we do both of these things? And I think that we as artists have to, not that we don't work hard enough, boy, do we work so hard, but we have to be unified, more unified. We have to seek each other out, seek out the ones that are not seeking people out and say like, look, I'm gonna need you to get with the program, because we as artists have to be more unified in like how we're doing this attack. Because we have to be very thoughtfully and cognizantly saying, okay, we're in a huddle. You go, you swim. I'm gonna go pirate this ship. I'm gonna, and we have to be doing this in a way where we have a battle plan, because some of us are more useful in getting in the ship and like taking it over and pirating it and turning it around. And some of us are more useful. Some of us are great swimmers. So we should jump off the boat and swim, but we have to know what our plan is. And we have to engage and activate each other in a really targeted, focused way. And that's the thing that I want to see and that I'm trying to do.
Yes, and I feel very privileged to live in Chicago, where Lillian and a number of us have been able to really kind of over time seek to make change. And we have Chicago's a great town.
Lisa, can I also just like add that it wasn't just Monty who left the Ignition Festival, it was all of the Ignition artists left the Ignition Festival in a unified way.
My understanding was that they had decided to not program a couple of shows in order to center on Monty's show, and that Monty said, "I'm not going to be used like that," and walked.
Yeah, I think they were gonna try to do the other people later, but
Yeah.
like they were all like, we're all done completely,
Right.
which was awesome.
So that's collective. The Playwrights Collective left. A number of us signed a letter, including people nationally, including Nataki and Jay. I mean, it's just that we have to pull together in this moment. And I don't know if I'm a pirate or a swimmer, but I love it. So back to Nataki and Jacob, and actually really the whole panel, but I'd like Nataki and Jacob to leave this off. And Jacob, you started to address this. You do have a dream board, but what does a change-making board look like? What does a change-making board look like? What or who must it include? What are the elements of a change-making board? And I'm recalled to a board, your board member on their own said, "I'm going to read White Fragility," bought it for the group, had a session. So didn't just read it, you know what I mean? That they seem to kind of like infect the entire board with new thought.
Yeah, so I actually wrote down a couple of key things just in trying to think about what does a change-making board look like. So I wrote, a change-making board shares the values of the institution rather than their ability to write checks. A change-making board are thought partners rather than roadblocks. A change-making board is deeply invested in the success of their new artistic director. And they do not break us down, but they lift us up. A change-making board is invested in creating the conditions that allow people of color to not just survive in their institutions, but to thrive inside their institutions. And a change-making board dismantles the mythology that there are not BIPOC leaders in the community who have money to be a part of our boards. So those are a couple of things I wrote down.
Yeah, okay. That, can you just publish that in the chat, please? That's well articulated. And if you would please publish it in the chat, because I think we're saving the chat, be fantastic. Great, Nataki.
Yeah, so I lift up everything that Jacob just said, and I really want to amplify this this point about creating the conditions for making sure that BIPOC members of the board feel like they have a space and home. The conditions for making sure that they understand what it means when they bring in a BIPOC leader who actually has to not just shift the scope of the organization, but shift the operations, the way in which money is raised, how I have conversations with a funder is going to be completely different than how somebody else does. And I think it's really important that a change-making board puts their money where their mouth is, the things that they hold dear, how their mission is implemented, how they work through mission to make sure that the way they challenge the world through their organization is actually operationalized, and not to just tout this idea of a mission, but to really live and embed yourself in it. And I think the other thing about a change-making board is a board that constantly reassesses for itself why they are on the board and what they are there to do. I often have conversations with my board chair about the board's fiscal and fiduciary responsibility to the organization. I see myself as an extension of that. They made a decision about me, that therefore the decisions that I make have to keep in mind that responsibility. And when your money reflects your values, your fiscal responsibility is embedded in the operations and how we move forward. And I don't know if all boards actually exist that way. When I joined the TCG board, I was aware that there was a kind of suggestion. I was also aware, because at the time I was a freelance artist, so I didn't really have the resource to make that suggested donation. So what I did was organize people around me to make sure that I had at least some aspects, some parts that I could pull together, because I wanted to put my money where my mouth is. And I think going forward, a change-making board, even if they can't see the horizon line in the way that their leadership does, that change-making board is prepared to move towards the horizon line no matter what, standing behind, next to, and around the leadership as they move forward. and they can be in concert with one another. You can be both the pirate and the swimmer. You can have both if you need to. And I think that's going to be important for all of our boards. One last thing, I think it's really important to lift up what Dominique and Liliane have been saying. I am an artist. I see myself as an artist actually first. I am also an administrator and a producer, but I am an artist. And I think it's really important that artists understand how much power we have and how, because we are the voice, we are the reason. People just spent the last 3 months in their homes, and what did they do? They paid attention to art and art making and stories and the impact of those stories. And when they ran out of Netflix to watch, they went over to Marquee, and they were on Broadway HD, and they started to watch all the plays that were coming through, because we are the voice and we have our ears to the ground and we understand where the society is heading. And we have to be the ones to name that for us and have us move forward. And if your board separates those two ideas, you as the story, you as the story maker, you as the person who can distill and understand our humanity, if they take that out of the center of the work that you're doing, then you have no reason to show up and do the work at all. The board doesn't have anything to do, and neither do the artists in the organization. And an organization is put together to support artistry. That is the purpose of the organization. The organization, the reason why you form an organization is to provide a platform on which the artists can do the work that they came to do. And if your organization isn't focused in that way on making sure that it is a platform first, before it hires any marketing, before we have development, before we put anybody in any building to do anything, the primary purpose of that place is for the artists and for the artistry to have a place to blossom and a place to resound where we are as humans and where our society needs to head. And that's what we need to platform in the middle of our board meetings. We have to platform that in the middle of our board recruiting, and we have to platform that as we talk to people about how they're going to help fund our organizations going forward. That has to be at the center.
Publish that, please. We have about another 6 minutes. Does anybody else want to take up this question? What does a change-making board need? What must it be?
Can I talk?
Yeah, Teresa.
Hey, I think what I'd like to, what all the other panelists have shared is just so right on. And I really just want to add something more of a nuance in all of this, and it's not even a nuance, it's bigger than a nuance, but I think there also has to be a distinction on boards between, we know that diverse points of view, and diversity meaning, different businesses, different, backgrounds, diversity means a lot. So different points of view are incredibly valuable in trying to make especially complex decisions for an organization. But I think you have to decide in what kinds of decisions do we need lots of points of view? Some may be dissenting in order to get us to the best answer and the best way forward. And what are some of the decisions that we might make that really, if you're not on board, you shouldn't be on board? And I think that that's important right now, because I hear too many boards talking about, we're trying to adopt equity, diversity, and inclusion values. We want to be anti-racist, but we have a few board members who aren't really on board, and they're resisting, and they're not, they don't believe, they think we're paying too much attention to that. I mean, that's core, that's values, that's about people. And I don't think that a discussion in which, I don't think you can have people staying on boards that are seeking those values and seeking to dismantle white supremacy and invest in anti-racism, and have board members who aren't on that path as well. So those are hard choices for board chairs around the country, and figuring out how to make sure that, again, the kinds of decisions that really benefit from having different points of view and different beliefs versus those that really need everyone on board moving in the same direction. If that makes sense.
That's great. Anybody else? We have permission to go just a little bit over if folks can stay. There's 4 questions in the chat in the Q&A that I just want to go ahead and see if we can get at least 1 or 2 of them in. Is that all right with everybody? So maybe Natalie, do you want to lead us forward? I think maybe till 11:20. I know we have Lay at 12:20. I know we have Lay at 12:30, so let's try to get ourselves out by 12:20, 11:20 Central, 10:20 Pacific.
Yeah, so folks, feel free to upvote in the Q&A section the questions that you absolutely want to see answered. The top one that we have here is from Michael at New Rep. He writes, "This may not be everyone's experience, but given the new moment and disruption that we are in, should we throw out the current model of boards and reinvent it globally? Many of us are great about building good board cultures, but if the base structure is broken, perhaps the tactics of gluing and taping a broken model is not what we should do."
Anybody?
I think that's the case. I would just say yes. I mean, again, I'm a board member of some theaters, but I also think that the way that we're used is very differently. I can say that I like being an artist board member, because I can always bring that to the table, but I'm also aware that as an artist board member, I am not always, sometimes I have to tell a theater from the jump, if you want me on your board, it's got to be because of my relationships. I can't get everybody some money. I don't have that many rich people I have only the same few rich friends. They're not that many, so, and so I can't, there's other things I have to be able to provide for you. It can't just be about me being a money person, but I also, again, I think that if you're going to tear down, and we're all sort of looking at a tear down, rebuild model. And I do think I don't think that we're going to be able to see change happen if we're just trying to incrementally take things that are not working and just slowly phase them out. That's what's already happened. That's what we have been doing for a very long time. In this moment of we're in a moment of insurrection. We're coming through a plague and an insurrection. I think it's asking for radical change for all of us, and uncomfortable change. And I do want to see that go to boards, and I want to see it go from the top down, but I also want to see it go from the bottom up, because there has to be a little, if we can work both ways, we'll find our way to the middle a lot faster. And I think that, we're always thinking like from that point of view, and we're not engaging. We rarely, when I work with young people, it's always like I'm being cute. Like, oh, that's so cute. And Dominique works with young folks, as opposed to like, what are you talking about? Like, they changed this whole country. Like, if you're not messing with young people, I don't know how you think you're going to be here. I don't know how you think you're going to be around, because they have not only are they the mind, but they are literally, the thing that's going to keep you alive and keep your industry alive. And far too long, there's also the ageism that I think is on boards. Why aren't we engaging more young people in general in theater? If you can get young people on your boards, you can get young people because again, we're focused on board thinking money and relationships, but young people have skill that these older board members do not have. And that skill provides a lot of opportunity for growth and a lot of opportunity for expansion of audience. So I don't think we're giving young people enough power. And that is part of what I would like to see shift dramatically when we come out of this moment that we're in.
That's exciting. And I think, what's really great is that it's already happening. I mean, the thing is taking itself apart. I don't think we have to actually destroy the thing. The thing is taking itself apart. The audiences are not coming to the theater, and the artists are saying, I'm not coming back unless you actually change what you're doing. So it's dismantling itself, I think, in a really profound and game-changing way. As Nataki will say, 60% of the audience is probably not coming back. So we better figure out who the new audience is, and we better figure out how our theaters are going to serve the new world. I'm going to take Camilla Long's question real quick, which is, what are the top 3 things we should be challenging the board to do today? 3 things. And then I think we'll be out. Michelle, I'm going to call on you.
Yeah. So I like it. Top 3 things today. Bring the new voices in response to the current programming. Find a way to do that. With the blackout, I think it's been really interesting because, hold some space open for other people who you're not normally affiliated with to share their ideas. I think that's really important as well. Think about, bringing in different curation, different groups who have been marginalized or not part of the organization in some ways, provide some space for them as well. And actually, I do think this is a moment for call and response. You know, when people are asking for change, respond to them and show them what you're going to do today, you know, how that's going to happen. I do think that it's important to, you know, invite people to join your committees, join the board in different ways. Obviously, there are different processes by which that happen, but people often feel like they need to be invited or invited to nominate and invited to step up and to know that they are welcome. And I think it's important to send out that messaging.
That's great. That's great. Anybody else want to grab 3 things? We're going to leave it with Michelle.
I would just I'll offer one thing is like read a book, like actually pick up a book like White Fragility, How to Be an Anti-Racist, Dismantling White. I mean, there's so many fantastic resources out there. And I think that the way in which people keep like asking, well, what should we do? I don't know where to start. This is so hard. It's like, you know, BIPOC folks have been holding it down. We've been holding it down for so long. We are holding that trauma in our bodies. One of the things that you can do is pick up a fucking book and educate yourself.
Educate yourself.
Teresa has something.
Yeah, I want to second that. We talked in the trustee sessions this week about different reading material. We talked about the 1619 project, which is really extraordinary. But I also just wanted to mention to everybody here, and I saw this come up in the chat, we have had theater trustees meeting this week, and they've just been doing some really wonderful work. They've shifted all of their intended programming and have been talking about some of very, very much along the lines of what we've been discussing today. So one thing we can do now is make sure that those trustees continue to meet, continue to read, continue to educate themselves, and also be open to radical change within their organizations going forward.
Nataki's got something.
Yeah, I also want to lift up that when you are in these trustee meetings and when you're talking to your colleagues across the field, even when the TCG conference has completed this year, be willing to interrupt and call your colleagues to the mat. We are in a come get your cousins atmosphere right now, and what I think organizations really need is to hold each other accountable. And at the board level, it's okay to step across your line and say, that is not okay. You are actually incorrect about that notion. You need to also read a book and come on and get with the times, and to interrupt those moments, knowing that you have been trained, knowing that you have the resources, knowing that you are the theater who's read the books. And your board has already engaged in those things. Be able to say in those rooms, I will not stand for that in these spaces. I will interrupt that.
Thank you. And please don't, you're absolutely right. And please don't leave it to your new leader of color to do that work. Please don't leave it to your new leader of color or to your artists to do that work. You do that work. I want to say thank you to TCG. I kind of called everybody up like 2 days ago. I was like, we got to talk about boards. Thank you to all the panelists who answered the text or the email to say, yes, I'll be on that conversation. Thank you to all of you who participated, who listened to this conversation and got in on the chat and shared your resources and your thinking. I think the chat will be saved. And I hope that this will be, the recording will somehow, or a transcript will be made public to participants and to anybody else who wants to know. Thank you. Have a great day. Don't miss Lay, and we'll see you soon.